Welcome once again to Founders Friday. I think it was great to have some of you back here again. Today, I think we are privileged to have Nat. Nat is a lawyer that has been specializing a lot in the technology space over the last few years, and he himself has also been getting himself involved in various investments and areas of the venture-backed kind of startups in Singapore. So today, I'm kind of I'm privileged to have him here. Maybe Nat, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Nathanael. I'm a practicing lawyer. Like Sam said, I specialize in the tech industry. A bit of my work also involves work in the startup, venture capital, fundraising kind of scene. So I've helped companies in their fundraising rounds, all the way to IPO. So some of the clients I've worked with include Razer, Central Ventures, Singtel for some of the tech stuff. So a broad range of work. And I've done a fair number of startups. And thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm happy to share my experience with managing founder conflicts.
Yeah, and I think Nat is kind of interesting because you had a degree in both commercial and the legal side, right?
Yes. In fact, I did a double degree. So I did my law degree, and at the same time I did business, specializing in finance. In another life, I would have studied computer science. But yeah, it was at a point in time where nobody played video games for a career.
I see.
And look at where the world is.
I see. So I guess you had a whole different range, all the way from small, very smallish kind of startups to all the scale ups and big tech companies.
Yeah, it's a broad range. So I've done seed rounds at 100,000, 50,000, all the way to your 700 million IPO. The range of work. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, maybe let's start. Maybe Nat would like to share a little bit about the whole topic for today about founders conflict.
Sure, thanks, Sam. I'm only going to speak for 5 minutes, just to share some of my experience, and I think there are a number of questions, and we can have a conversation as to what I've seen.
Yep.
I prepared some slides, so it's like I said about founder conflict, and really the genesis of founder conflict is disagreement. The easiest way is to agree beforehand, and so today I'll just run through some of the common grounds we see where founders have conflicts, as well as some of the legal ways we've seen which can help to manage the conflict process. I've seen startups live and breathe and then die upon founder conflicts. True story, we in fact had one of the founders who very unfortunately passed away. And the startup basically struggled on. So it's important to be able to manage the founder kind of relationship beforehand before you go into the relationship. One of the three common areas for founder conflict we see. The first is pulling our weight. Who has the responsibility to do what? Sometimes you have founders, who quarrel, say, you're not doing enough. Why didn't you do this? I thought you're supposed to do that. How come I'm working till 1 a.m. and you are, clocking off at 9 p.m. These kind of things. So one common area of conflict is pulling our weight. The second area of conflict we see is in terms of operational strategic decisions. Should we take on this fundraising? Do we want to go into this commercial partnership? Should we pivot? Should I, down to simple things, should we use React Native for this language, or should we use something else? Should we launch an app or do a web platform? In terms of the operational growing the business, that's another common ground for conflict. The third area I usually see founder conflict is in leaving and exit. So when, maybe after a year, 6 months, founders are, I'm tired. One founder is, I want to leave. How do you manage that process? How do you exit in a amicable way which doesn't damage the company? So these are the three common areas. Of course, when you're day in, day out with a founder, there are, many fires to put out. There's so many other grounds of conflict. It's really like a marriage. But these are the three kind of areas we see. To address these three areas, I think there are broadly three ways we recommend to deal with this. The first is to agree upfront. If you can agree on certain specifics, that will help. So, and I'll go through some practical measures later on what you can agree. The other way is to have a decision-making process to decide who's the boss, who has that casting vote, who decides on something. And the third way is to decide how to leave. Usually all of this can be included in what people call a founder's document or basic shareholders agreement when you first set up a company. And that's where the lawyers come in, right? And we help to draft and to run through some of these matters. So for six practical ways, and this is really just to bring forth some of the issues I would really encourage founders to think about before they start their business and before they start running. 6 practical measures you should look at. The first is to agree on clear responsibilities. If you can have literally a list of, for example, this person is in charge of marketing and this is what we expect him to do. Some people go as far as to specify working hours. What's the expectation? You can say we expect each other to put in 8 hours of work each day, and or even email response time. I expect you to respond to emails by a certain time and response. So if you can agree on clear responsibilities at the start, this helps to deal with any why aren't you doing this, because you have things upfront. Agree on a business plan and a budget. When making business decisions, I think startups need to be very, very flexible, right? The business scene is always changing. If you have a business plan with broad outlines, what is your budget expenditure, how long you plan to pursue this strategy, what are ancillary strategies you want to consider. Having a sort of a business plan upfront helps to give guiding principles what people can, where or what kind of decisions you can make along the way. Some startups or some founders choose to have an overall person in charge. So this is the person who, sometimes the CEO, chairman of the board, he holds the casting vote. So you agree up front to say, okay, if we all disagree, somebody at the end of the day, we agree that he shall take the lead. Usually, sometimes this is a matter of shareholding. Sometimes you say that, okay, the person who has the most shares has the most risk, and therefore, he decides the direction. You can actually break this down to be a bit more nuanced. You can actually have some people who have a say in a particular area. So, for example, you can say that, okay, while this person has a casting vote in marketing, this person should have the casting vote in tech. So all decisions which is in relation to the technical solution, we let this person have the casting vote regardless, and he holds the baby. If you have this kind of mechanisms in your shared agreement, it helps to make the decision a lot better. For leaving, what we always encourage founders is to consider what if somebody wants to leave the ship. And it's a very common thing, after 1 year, a founder may be tired, maybe there's new family commitments. Decide on how long a founder should stay in order to have their shares vested. Because what you don't want to have is a founder who leaves and he has a 10% share, for example, and no longer pulls his weight. And then, you get a quarrel as to, hey, what are you doing this? Can you sell me back shares? So have a kind of agreement as to how to deal with shares right at the start, contemplating the possibility of exit. And the last one, obviously, as a practical measure, is to have that valuation for exit so that you can decide how you want to deal on a commercial basis if you want to buy back shares. So these are generally the 6 practical measures we encourage to have in the shareholders document to manage founder conflict. And apart from that, there are a whole lot of other mechanisms and ways to deal with conflict and resolution. But yeah, this is generally what we recommend, and do consider that. That's all I have for my slides, and I'm happy to have any questions. And Sam, please let's carry on the conversation.
Perfect. I think that was a good and short sharing that we have over here, regards to the founders conflict itself. I like the way that's being laid out. You have 6 core areas of things that we are actually trying to ensure that we have certain things kind of agreed up front. But maybe for the benefit of some of them on the call, I'm just wondering, some of them might not understand what it means by vesting. So what exactly is shares vesting?
Sure. So share vesting is the procedure. When we say vesting, it means it's something like when do you like really own the shares, right? So sometimes when you let's say you join the company and you say, okay, I want to give you 10 shares. You don't give it all up front. You say, okay, in the first year you get 2, next year you get 2, and then every year you get 2, for example. So that's the best. And in a founder kind of situation, you could say that, okay, we both own 50%. But in order for you to own the full 50%, you must stay for 5 years, 10%. And if you leave in the first year, then you only have 10%. Something like that. That's a simple concept of vesting.
So it's essentially a simple concept that making sure that people stay and get the benefit from it. But of course, there are some people who will say that if you leave, you get nothing at all. Is there a mechanism around it?
Yeah. So usually, and sometimes that makes sense because what's the point of holding shares which you don't want to contribute to, right? So a very fair way is to say that, okay, if I leave and I've contributed enough, to make the company up to a certain value, then the company should have the right to buy back those shares at that current valuation. Because you need to recognize some of that contribution. So that's a common mechanism people use.
I see. Yeah, I think that kind of pretty much answered one of the questions that you're talking about, the common kind of conflicts that among founders you have encountered. Now, of course, when it comes to help and all, what are the avenues of help they might have, when they encounter, any conflicts? Do they go to a lawyer immediately, or, is there any resources or any ways that they can get information like this?
We always say prevention and cure, right? So if you're at a preventive stage, these are topics. I mean, obviously, if you flesh it out and think about it before you start, that's the best, right? Assuming you don't have that, then there's the usual mediation, just having open conversation. Obviously, these are the logical steps you want to. We do encourage. If you there will come a certain point in time, I think, when there's a certain formality required, where you might want to engage a lawyer to write, for example, the termination letter or the exit letter. So I've dealt with startups where one founder is leaving, they can't agree, but you want to be able to work out the issues which may cause disagreement in the future. So things like, do I retain my shares? Can you buy me out? Or if you buy me out 1 year from now, what's that procedure? You will want to set that out properly in a letter, a termination letter or exit letter. And that's where you might want to engage a specialist. It doesn't need to be a lawyer, but a specialist who's familiar with this.
I see. When you say specialist, what are the kind of specialists you're talking about? So actually, do you need a lawyer in all situations, or or when you say specialist, what do you mean by that?
Well, this is like shooting my own profession. So okay, so I think lawyers obviously specialize in this, right? We draft things which we know are enforceable in court. Yes. That's the real value of a legal document. You want to be able to exercise that right, correct? But ultimately, what you're looking for is really a subject matter expert. So even if you go to someone like Sam, from who like yourself, who you've seen enough situations, he can advise you on the substantive stuff. But I think when it comes to putting pen to paper, you might want a lawyer to put the pen to paper.
You need a lawyer to draft sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Just make sure that you are foolproof and it's enforceable, and the lawyer can endorse the document.
Yes, correct. Because the last thing you want is that you go to court and say, oh, actually, we can't really use this document.
Yeah, true. And anyway, I have a question here from Eugene, actually, from amongst here. I think the key question he has is based on his experience. Founders conflict, obviously from a VC perspective for him, if not well managed, can impact fundraising significantly. What is your advice to founders managing this?
I think from the VC point of view, and we hear this from our VC partners, you obviously look at the founding team, right? To know that, if the ship is rocky, you don't really want to join the ship, right? I think what founders need to have is to really be upfront and it's going to be unrealistic to say we're never going to have a conflict, right? But I think what convinces or helps assure investors is to, number one, know that you have a proper resolution format. So even if a conflict arises, you give the assurance that, look, we've agreed this is how we're going to do the conflict resolution. The worst thing that happens, I mean, if somebody leaves, then we know that this is dealt with properly. I think that gives a certain assurance that their founders, number one, are mature enough to recognize that it may happen. As opposed to founders say, no, everything is fine, we're never going to quarrel. Then you might be a bit cautious.
I see. So essentially is that you also want them to be astute about it, that they have most things that are properly aligned on their front. Because the last you want, in fact, actually I came across a case before, of a company whereby their founding team literally after a few years had a big disagreement. And if you want to rely back on the shareholder agreement or even founders agreement, it's not there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think as a result of that particular kind of VC just have to wipe out the whole founding team and hire a professional to run it.
Yes, we've seen this situation before, so it is quite common, I mean, unfortunately. So you want to have proper and okay, obviously the document is one thing, right? But lawyers always say, the paper is worth as much as how trustworthy the other party is. And the reality of the paper is not that is in there, but that you have thought about it.
True.
Because what you have thought about, what you have contemplated, you can reduce to writing, right? So yeah, the real value add is the contemplation as opposed to that piece of paper. That piece of paper is evidence that we've done our due diligence and we've thought about it, and this is how we
spoke about it, thought about it, and we have aligned.
Correct. Because I mean, a lot of conflict, and I mean, in real life, it's also the case. Before you get married, if you don't talk about stuff, you realize you leave the stones unturned.
Yeah.
Then that's where you get the conflict,
True. Yeah, that makes sense. But of course, I think there's a question over here which basically leads to the same, concept alignment. What are the factors that contribute to founders having a light vision in a very dynamic environment? I guess she's coming from the perspective that, basically what it takes, especially when it comes to, kind of founders agreement and founders conflict, that allow them to have a light vision. What are the mechanisms in terms of tools, and based on experience, what should they do?
Yeah, I think founder alignment has a lot to do with talking, right? When a good shareholders agreement or a good founders agreement will be able to flesh, and even if you don't reduce it to writing, right? You can see that when founders have communicated enough, they know what is the vision of the company, they know where they want to go, how they want to do it. That's where your real alignment comes. I actually find a lot of this in the business plan and budget more than the founders agreement, because in the business plan you set out what is the vision for the company. I want to target 1 million revenue by X. These are my milestones. This is how I'm going to do it. And when you trash that out, you can really then you can understand the alignment there, because a good business plan will be able to contemplate that. And once you have those working principles, you know where you can pivot towards, because like you said, it's a dynamic environment. I mean, one day if you're doing if you're selling hardware, laptops, and you want to say, okay, now I want to do video, I want to do video marketing, it's a complete change. And if you don't even have a business plan, you can't really talk about these kind of things.
Of course, because you can't really kind of rely back on something that you agreed upon.
Yeah, correct.
But of course, is there a way to make a business plan legally enforceable?
Yes.
Or is it just a guideline for internal, conflict resolution?
So, no, it's a good question. It is up to the founders to decide how they want to bind themselves. If you look at VC investment, a lot of times they will say, okay, the company must come with a business plan, and we are investing this amount based on you following this business plan. And if you want to deviate, then you need certain approvals. So it is enforceable from that sense. You have a legal obligation to follow. But I think parties are generally flexible enough to know that in a dynamic scene, you have to pivot, and that's where crafting a good business plan comes in.
But let's say, obviously business plan, especially in the tech startups, especially the early stage ones, is always very, kind of, there's always a lot of uncertainty. And we know that the general trend is everyone being more optimistic about their assumptions than anything. So, when you talk about mechanisms of, enforcement, are you talking about a certain profit target, or is it more like, saying that based on the guideline, these are the actionable steps that we're going to take for us to move forward, and you have to take that? What are the kind of things that you have seen when it comes to enforcing business plan?
So this is a very interesting question. You're absolutely right to say that founders are very optimistic. You want to start, right? So it's very good to speak to lawyers, because lawyers are very pessimistic people. We specialize in when things go wrong. That's the whole point of lawyers. No way. Uh, I think that the enforceability of a business plan in terms of actionable steps is really a matter that the founders need to sit down together. In that, from what I've seen, founders who have a very clear vision as to what they want to do, it may not be reduced in the business plan, are the ones that really succeed. Founders which are quite waffly, they just want to have dip their toes into water and to try kind of things. That's where the conflict really kind of starts. A good business plan and working with people like Paloe, for example, who specialize in kind of things, where you can set out budgetary expenses, estimate, what budget limits, how much do I plan to expense on certain things. These are really very helpful. The enforceability comes from nobody rarely do people take people to court for spending like $50 more, kind of thing. It's really a common understanding between founders, which goes back to the alignment. Once you're aligned on a certain way, you reduce conflict a bit more.
Got it. Yeah, anyway, I just saw a very interesting questions regards to founders conflict. He was saying there are degrees of founder conflict, and interestingly, his question is which are illegal and which are immoral. Is there like illegal founders conflicts around that you have experienced before? Okay.
Illegal and immoral, interesting question. When you ask a lawyer, that the lawyer will tell you, okay, if you operate within the four walls of the contract, it is legal, right? So the answer is yes. We have seen interesting founder conflicts. So sometimes, where especially when you have a certain founder and then the co-founder comes later, right? And then you have a lead founder which presents the document. Sometimes founders are strategic. They like to, or sometimes some people are strategic in that they include very not obscure, maybe obscure, but they include little details which will benefit them. So for example, you might have a clause where you can buy out the person for $1. Sometimes they try and sneak things in. So you might have something where there's a conflict, is legal, but at the point of signing, the other co-founder says, hey, I just signed this out of trust. I didn't read the agreement. Why are you enforcing this on me? So it might be legal, but from an ethical point of view, do you really want to start the relationship that way? So I think a lot of conflict, which treads this illegal, immoral kind of thing, is where you have a commercial decision where it may not be commercially fair, but one party enforces its legal rights based on the document.
So of course, it's just based on legal rights, especially when you're dealing with founders who are first time starting a company and have never really dealt with contracts before. A lot of them could be very trusting to just kind of put that in. If they have a founder that is a bit more astute as well.
So I can give you a good example. So for sometimes you have two founders, let's say 70%, 30%, or 60-40, doesn't matter. And you have the right to dilute each other. If you want to issue more shares, so I've seen cases where a founder says, okay, we're out of money, I want to raise 100,000 and I'm going to put in 100,000 and you're going to be diluted. And for example, if you work with a co-founder who may not have the same monetary backing, you ask yourself, is it fair to dilute someone on that basis, right? You could do it within the four walls. And then the conflict arises, or some is even worse. Some founders just issue shares to themselves and dilute them without even telling them. And that's where you go to the immoral, but issuing shares is legal, right? But the immoral kind of unethical actions.
Yeah. Yeah, but on this question, right, there is situations whereby you have a founder that probably have a majority stake and no reserve matters on that front. But that said, there could be a situations that because they're majority shareholder and they want to do a dilution, they probably can do something like putting a $1 or very low valuation and dilute everyone out. Is that even legal? Or is there a way to kind of ensure that this is not done to them?
So number one is absolutely legal. That is the
Okay.
number one. So I mean, if you have an unethical lead founder, right? There's nothing illegal about issuing shares.
Yep.
And if the parties have not agreed on any share issuance restrictions,
Yep.
in a sense, it's free for all.
Yep.
Obviously, the first preventive measure is never to go into bed with someone like this, right?
Yeah.
If you're dealing with someone who's going to do like that,
you don't want to work with them.
You don't really want to work with them. Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you look at shareholders agreement and even founders agreement, you do have a lot of protective mechanisms. So for example, you have what you call preemptive right. If I issue shares to one party,
yep,
you must give the equal opportunity to the other party to be issued shares. Things like this.
Yeah. I see. But that said, is there a way to kind of, a recourse for that if they found out too late? Is there a way to kind of at least ask for injunction to just drag on a little bit and potentially do any recourse around that to say that the valuation is not fair?
Yeah, so the honest answer is that the legal recourse way is actually quite low. If you don't have, because a legal recourse assumes that you have breached a contract.
Yeah.
Right? So that and if you don't breach the contract, then there's little reason for the court to say you should grant an injunction lah.
Yeah.
But then I mean it's hard lah.
It's hard to have a recourse lah.
It's hard, yeah.
So it goes back to the whole same question as that we know is it better to have the whole thing settled at the start.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, which actually answers a little bit of question that Nicholas came out with, Nicholas Ong. Basically what he was saying is that asking which stage should the team have a shareholder agreement. I think we are both aligned that it should be as early as when you found the company, right?
Yeah. So okay, there are actually two separate questions, right?
Yes.
The two more nuanced questions is number one, when do you load on legal cost?
Yeah.
Okay. You should always I think when founders start, you do need to reduce some stuff to writing. So even if it's not with a lawyer, you should set out things that you can help yourself negotiate around some restrictions. I would say as early as possible, engage a lawyer who can give you a cost-effective solution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if it's not a lawyer, work with people, experts. Speak to other co-founders. Understand the conflict, and if you can write those down to reduce, have everything at the start to reduce that conflict position. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, if you were, there's a question over here. What are the biggest legal mistakes made by a startup founder that you encountered?
Sorry, what are the biggest what?
What are the biggest legal mistakes made by a startup founder that you encountered in your career so far?
Wow, so many, man. Is this particular to founder conflicts?
I think in terms of founder conflicts or from a legal perspective of things, the legal mistake in general.
Okay, I think one of the biggest mistakes, a lot of it comes at the fundraising round, especially in the early stages.
Okay.
I've seen founders commit to very unfair investors for the sake of money.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So when you give up too much for too little at the start, and some of this might just be because you just don't really know the market, right?
Yeah.
It's like you go and buy a car and you say, oh, this car is 100,000. It's like so cheap. Actually, you should only be paying 50,000 for it, for example, right?
Yeah.
When founders don't do enough homework and you get too excited by investor, they commit to terms which are too onerous. That can be quite crippling on a founder at the start. A founder. It comes out in a lot of ways. For example, if you get too much equity, by the time you go to your second or third round of fundraising,
you get stuck.
Yeah, because you don't have enough control of the company. You know, you're effectively the founders are running, the investors are running. Yeah.
True. Yeah, but that said, is there any legal way to remove unproductive founders with less than 10% shareholding?
Legal way.
Yeah, there was a question posted by someone over here, an anonymous person.
Well, the legal way is really to start a new company.
Okay. But can you
Right.
transfer the assets or anything?
You can. So I think as long as you don't have if you don't have any restrictions as to share transfers, I'm assuming you don't. If not, you might have thought of a way to deal with this 10% kind of like lazy shares. One realistically possible way is to really just sell the company to another company, all the shares, so that the whole business is transferred there. But I mean, obviously, if you can engage in a proper conversation and a proper valuation, sometimes it's commercial. A very good example, Snapchat. Snapchat US had a very onerous clause by its first round investors who refused to let go of the shares. The founders had to buy them out at a ridiculous price. So similar to the 10%, I mean, similar to basically you have a shareholder who doesn't want to budge. Yeah, sometimes commercially you have no choice but to buy them out, which goes back to the fact why you have to be really careful at the start.
I see. So so of course since you're talking about kind of fundraising and when they're committing a clause, what are the key clauses to take note of? To consider I must have in a shareholder agreement. What are the good common practices for the types of share to issue, options among founders, ESOPs, angels? Well, it's a long question. And new investors for a startup in Series A, and how it affects the cap table.
Okay, maybe just a few guiding principles lah. If you're a company, ordinary shares are generally better, right? Because preference shares have more higher requirements, right? You are giving preferred shares. So ordinary shares are always better. I think dealing with family and friends, that's a bit more acceptable. When you're dealing with strategic investors who are going to help your business, you might want to be fair and recognize their contribution by giving preferred shares. General principle one. Principle two is, I think it's become quite market. The type of rights to give in a fundraising is quite market. This ranges from preemption rights, anti-dilution, drag, tag, right of first refusal, these kind of questions, these kind of rights. So do the market research to make sure it's not out of whack, I would say. There is quite a standard thing. In terms of share dilution and how you manage your cap table, in your first, generally, I think as a good guiding principle, don't raise more than 20 to 30% of the company. If you keep raising 20 to more than that, you risk over diluting yourself such that you lose control. So benchmark 20-30%.
When you say 20-30%, you mean at all rounds combined, or at what round are you talking about here?
Generally at each round. Like if you mathematically conclude, you do 20-30% of each round generally. So it's not absolute, right? It's 20-30% of the whole company, right? So everybody dilutes down a little bit as well. So you still can manage your cap table a bit more. ESOP is a good question. I mean, ESOPs are used to motivate employees. I will always say that options are always better than shares.
Okay.
You can deal with options a lot more flexibly than shares. Shares, if you are shareholder on a cap table, you have to sign your shareholder resolution, so on and so forth. Having options allow you the contractual flexibility to deal with them more. And with that, I guess a shameless plug, you should work with lawyers who know how to design your ESOP well to give you that flexibility.
Well, what are some of the ways of a good lawyers to be able to advise on that front?
Yeah, so I mean, I can give you a very practical example lah. Okay, you don't ESOPs give employees the commercial benefit, right? Generally, I mean, the employees don't really care about having decision-making powers, which come along with shares. So So for example, one mechanism we design is that we say that the options cannot be exercised for shares
Yep.
up till a point of exit. So at the point of exit, when you're going to sell the company, for example, you don't even have to convert. The company just buys over those options. The employee gets the commercial recognition they deserve.
Yep.
You skip all the complications of having to share. So small tips and tricks like this, which feature in the ESOP, can go a long way in reducing your administrative burden.
Understand. And of course there are concepts like a shadow agreement or something like that, right?
Yeah, things like this. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so I think going back to this, talking about terms and negotiation and all, any tips regards to negotiating for better terms, or usually it's the investors that have power regards to all the terms that they set for you. What you have seen so far?
Okay, I would say that for a good reason, there's actually quite, like I said, there are pretty standard acceptable terms which people say on market. Like,
Yep.
I mean, if you expect to pay $1 for this, if somebody asks for 150, you tell him, please go and fly kite, it's $1.
Yep.
So now the first thing is to familiarize yourself with what are those market standards. Have a good gauge. This is negotiation 101. If you have a good gauge of the market, you have a stronger position to bring forth. So anything above market, you can negotiate down.
Yep.
First tip. The second tip is to know what you are happy to give and what you don't want to give. Right? Work with both commercial and legal experts who are familiar with the area, and then give you that credibility and confidence and comfort that what you're negotiating for is not, what you're not asking for too much.
Yeah.
The third thing is don't be afraid to say no. I've advised startups where I told them, no, I think this VC is just, they're lowballing you, just walk away. And they have done it. And there are enough fair investors in the market who will recognize you for what you deserve.
Understand. And of course they want to keep a reputation as well. That's probably where their pipeline and flow is.
Exactly.
So sometimes it's not to be too desperate or too worried to say no as well. Because for all you know, they just might be testing your commercial reality of things as well.
Yeah, no, and they just, and sometimes if you don't ask and don't try, you don't know what you get.
You don't know what you get. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Okay, I have a question here that I'm not sure exactly what it is referring to, but let me attempt that. How do founders, startups decide when it's time to delegate responsibility to a third party? I believe that is related to when it comes to founders, people outside of the founding side of it, when you start delegating those to third parties or to other people itself, what will happen in situations?
Well, I guess it's a bit more operational in question in line. I mean, I have some commercial experience when you can do it, but I would say that, I mean, and maybe Sam, you want to help with the question as to when time, but I would say that when you do so, the biggest thing we found flawed is that there isn't a clear expectation as to what the responsibility is. I have so many people who engage commercial partners where for want of a better word of common sense, you don't set down clearly what the responsibilities are and expectations. And that's when things go wrong, because some people think, oh, they're only supposed to do ABC, whereas you think they're supposed to do ABCDEFG, and then there's that commercial expectations. As to when, I think Sam, you have a good understanding as to when is a good time to expense, when is a good time to incur more cost.
No, I think at the end of the day, a startup has to grow, a company has to grow at the end of the day, and you can't. It's not all the times that you can only go within a founding pool. You will have time to start employing new people. You will be at time having to employ experts or subject matter experts or even advisors to join. And I think that's never really a good time, but I think it's at the end of the day, I agree with that. It's all about trying to define the responsibility, define the kind of scope of them coming in, and to be very clear as to what's the expectations on both ends. What for this amount of things that they are doing, what exactly are they getting in returns in terms of shares, or is there monetary return on that front? But of course, the person who posted this question previously might want to consider, kind of just posting another question just to follow up so that we are clearer into, the area you're asking for. But at the end of the day, you will definitely deal with third party. So there's always never a good time. You always gotta get yourself prepared on. But the decision itself is what is in it for them and what's in it for you at the end of the day. So I think that probably is the area that is important to kind of align on. Of course, the other question that I have here is that, do you actually use mediation to prevent or resolve founders' conflict? Is it a common thing? Or, people just, at the end of the day, will just talk it out and, just close down the company? What have you seen so far?
No, actually, we have seen mediation.
Okay.
Mediation, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes when you engage in a formal process, and mediation can be formal, right? You're paying mediation fees. You're going down to a mediation venue.
Yeah.
We have seen, and generally, I think it's always step by step, right? You start by having an open conversation, and when things break down, we have seen successful mediation sessions where the founders do manage to resolve some stuff. So I think as a dispute resolution mechanism, at least in agreements, we always say, look, make it mandatory for people to go for mediation. To be very honest, sometimes it is founder fatigue. You quarrel so much, you go to mediator, and then suddenly things make sense. Sometimes it's a matter of you need time to go through, and having a formal third party who specializes in this kind of, that does help the conversation for sure.
I see. Do you want to share a little bit about how the mediation process usually look like, or what it means as mediation for some of us who actually have not been through or not seen one before? How does it work?
So Singapore has, in the last 10 years, have stepped up their dispute resolution processes, right? So it's not only just court. We have what you call a Singapore Mediation Center, where you can, as in, you make a formal application to say, and obviously with mediation, unlike the court, two parties must agree. You can't mediate one person. So you serve the mediation notice. You have agreement, and then you can start that process with the SMC, Singapore Mediation Center. You can agree on a mediator to appoint. You can ask them to appoint it for you, and literally you turn up. There's a mediator who will then facilitate the questions. The process. What you do need to take off is that at the end of the mediation, okay, you need to come out with an agreement, right? And that mediation, that mediation, you can agree to give it the force of law if you want to. So you will say that, hey, we've agreed that you will do ABC, I'll do CD, and that can have the force of law, which gives you a bit more certainty how parties want to move forward.
I see. Does it necessarily have to involve lawyer in mediation in that case?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
At all. And in fact, sometimes I do say, look, it's a lot cheaper to try this out. You never know what's going to come out of it, and it may save you a lot of legal fees. At the same time, sometimes they want lawyers to be there, so you can have lawyers.
Okay.
The lawyer's role will, in that case, to brief the mediator. What's the conflict? Where are the lines drawn? But it's a bit different in the sense that it is obviously meant for resolution. And the good thing is that you can agree on confidentiality. So positions taken, facts shared during a mediation will not prejudice you if you do take formal court action.
I see. Got it. I have a question here. You were saying that it's probably new to this, but how should a founder take a value to the effort that they have to put in? Is there a way to calculate it? I think it's a question to both of us, but I think I'll let Ned answer this first.
I think the real answer is no. There is no hard and fast way. It's very hard to say this. But yeah, I think this is not a straightforward answer. I think this needs to really come from a mature recognition point of view. Some ways we do, for example, one way I've seen is say, okay, I would have drawn X dollars in salary. For 6 months I didn't. My sweat equity in a sense would have been $50,000 worth.
Yeah.
And therefore, we agree on a valuation of the company, I should get 50,000 worth of shares, something like that. You know, that there's a way to ascribe some monetary value to that. But really, you know, apart from that, you know, how much value I bring, how much sales I bring, it's quite an art lah, more than a science.
I think it's really an art, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about what's the value that you bring to the various parties at the end of the day. But I think the more important thing is, it's essentially going to be a handshake. What we are saying over here, like, you know, kind of salary difference, or even the value I bring in terms of sales and all, it is literally just a situation that you kind of put across to the other parties that this is the value I believe I'm bringing to the team. But ultimately, it's still going to be a handshake from all parties that this is what we agree upon, and on balance of things, this is what we're going to go ahead with. And that's also the reason why, you know, having the conversation very early on in the company becomes crucial. And I think more importantly, this is also very important, especially when some of you are looking for board advisors as well. There are cases where advisors comes in, but, you know, conversations are not open about it as to what they expect of the advisors. So they maybe in their impression, they expect an advisor to be almost everything, but the advisor thought that, you know, for this thing, I'm only willing to do this much. And that causes a lot of disagreement. I think that is also the other, you know, kind of spin off from this question. But for those of you who are actually looking to get your board advisors in, there are some tax implications as to the way it's structured as well. So this is something that, you know, probably we'll talk in another session. Yep. And I think there is a question here. What are the impact of COVID? Looks like we can't run away from a COVID question in every session. What the impact of COVID in future business from a lawyer perspective?
Well, what are the
implication or impact of COVID in future businesses from a lawyer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing you're saying from a legal perspective, what is the impact of COVID lah?
Yep.
Okay, I think a lot of what we saw from a legal perspective is that a lot of people were not expecting the COVID, obviously, right? And so a lot of business expectations were lost, were not met.
Yep.
What it did bring about is, okay, a specific legal portion is what people call force majeure. A force majeure clause is where something, to put it very simply, is when something very unexpected happens, which prevents one party from fulfilling an obligation of the contract. But because of this unexpected event, you will not be counted as breaching the contract. I think COVID did bring about the real possibility of these things happening. What we have found people doing now is to try to build a bit more detail as to what really is a force majeure. Right? I mean, some people say, you know, COVID, I mean, it's just pandemic, right? You know, why is that a force majeure? Whereas some people say, you know, this has wiped out my business, it should be counted for. So I think parties have had a more realistic view as to what really should entail a force majeure. And I've seen people detail out, you know, for example, there's a fire, or only if in the event of death of a key person, then you will consider this. I think that's the first specific impact we've seen in legal agreements, defining that force majeure kind of clause.
Yeah, and I think, so has anyone been successful in using COVID as a case of a force majeure to kind of void that contract that they might have?
So
have you seen any successful cases on that front, or is there any precedent at this moment?
Well, when we say successful in a legal sense, success means you go to court rules in your favor. I would say no, I have not personally dealt with this, but the good thing is, number one, we've seen parties being more understanding, and number two, we've seen parties being able to successfully enforce this in the sense that the other party has not tried to enforce his legal rights.
I see. So basically, they have a handshake.
Well, they've also taken a considered view. What are their chances that this can be successfully relied on? So I think they've taken a view that, you know, there is a real possibility that they might enjoy this force majeure. So they don't want to, you know, be too difficult.
Got it. All right, I have a question here. When incorporating, how should we go about splitting up shares between the founders. I heard from others that splitting the equity equally is not a wise move, but I really don't understand why.
Hmm. I just explained why the equal thing may not be vice versa. When it's 50-50, nobody can decide, right? 50-50 assumes that the decision making is diffused, and therefore we are both in this together. Sometimes you might have 60-40, 70. I mean, it depends on the split, but what I've always found helpful, if you have someone who is willing to bear the bigger risk, it might mean you put in bigger capital at the start, run the thing, and you hold the baby. So it is not wise in the sense that when you have 50-50, higher chance of a pure deadlock, 50-50, right, is real. Okay. How should you split shares is a very commercial question. I would say that it comes with risk upside. The bigger risk, obviously, the more upside, the more shares you hold. The person who's giving up more, who's contributing more to the table, should always take more. But it comes the bigger upside, the bigger risk in that way.
Well, of course, it's not always the case that you put more capital means you get more shares. It's not the same concept in Singapore.
Correct.
Right? Yeah, because, okay. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I think it still goes back to the same thing. It's about agreeing things up front, but the main reason behind it, like what Ned mentioned, is really about defining, who has the final say. I think that's actually from your slides, right, Ned?
Yes, I casting vote who has the final
say. It's actually who's the boss You need to have someone who make a decision. If you have everyone even out, at the end of the day, if there's a destroying decision, you can't move forward with everything.
Yeah, correct.
But that said, actually there are situations that you can have equal shares, while you have other mechanisms to decide who make the decision. Right?
Yeah.
So I think there's also many ways to kind of slice this whole thing. Anyway, I probably have time for one more question. Maybe I just ask Ned this question. In your presentation earlier, you talked about someone passing away.
Yes.
And what are some of the recommendations that you do to prevent something like this, whereby a co-founder passed away, and you want to make sure that things are in check, and operationally you still can move forward without a complication of maybe family members and all.
Yeah, so this was a very tough one. I mean, because very honestly, and even if you look at shareholders, very few agreements contemplate that. I mean, nobody wants. It is a very unfortunate thing to contemplate, right? So when this came to us, it was a legitimate legal question. What is the best way to solve it? And now that I've gone through one of these episodes, just to reflect back, what I thought could be good is to have a buyout mechanism whereby you allow one founder to buy out another in a result of certain things. So the two most obvious things we would usually say is in the event of bankruptcy, or in the event of death, or in the event of legal inability to hold the shares, either because of mental incapacity or regulatory purposes. I mean, you never know, right? Maybe so in that case, then you say, okay, when these occur, there's an automatic buyback or automatic mechanism to transfer the shares. And that's a lot more palatable than contemplating death. It's just one of the situations.
Yeah, I see. So there are actually quite a number of situations to plan for. But of course, is there any ways? I know of people who kind of have to buy insurance to kind of to safeguard themselves from this situation, right?
I'm not sure about the insurance on dealing with shares. But I mean, as a business, that is your usual insurance.
Yeah. All right. So I think that one probably will defer it for another time, for someone who's an insurance specialist or what to talk about this. And I'm just going to entertain this just one final question. Can you give us some insights on what kind of risk we are looking at? Is it just monetary?
Sorry, I'm assuming the
when it comes from a legal perspective, when you talk about legal risk itself, is it just monetary, or is there other risks or liabilities that someone can get themselves in trouble with?
Yeah, of course, there I mean, so monetary is losing the money. I mean, there's obviously reputational risk, and I think a lot of people miss the legal regulatory kind of risk. So for example, you run a fintech business, which is very popular and a good business. People forget that there are the licensing requirements. If you run an illegal license, illegal money lending business, for example. Let's say you do fintech in credit.
Yeah.
You might be money lending, or if you run a certain cash prize tournament, it might you might need to apply for certain licenses. I think a lot of people, the business run forward without them understanding what the regulatory and legal implications of the requirements to run their business. Some of those risks are personal on the directors. So a personal fine. Some get, the more severe ones have imprisonment, sentences. So you need to obviously make sure your compliance with the regulatory issues are in check.
Makes sense. Yeah. So I think probably going to come to the end of this. Maybe for Nat itself, is there one advice or one key advice that you give the founders and also business owners here regards to founders conflict in general, just to conclude the whole thing? What's your one most important advice that you would give?
One most important for founder conflict.
Yes.
I think like it's a bit like marriage lah. I mean, not to be too philosophical lah. The more you talk and communicate at the start, the easier the path forward is, I think. For some reason, people don't like to thrash through the hard topics. I would say go through the hard topics when the time is good. When you're starting, people are optimistic. You're happy, you're starting something new. It's a lot smoother to have difficult conversations when the time is good than to have difficult conversations when the time is bad. So I would really say go through that really at the start. It's worth spending that time, spending that effort at the start to minimize and to manage that conflict, which can be quite lethal to start up.
So essentially, it's to just agree everything when everyone is happy.
Yeah.
So that when things turn sour or turn unhappy, at least we have something to talk about when we are in our happy days. Exactly. Not different from marriage. Always think about your happy times.
Exactly. So when you want to quarrel with your wife, you should tell her the bad things when you are very happy. Don't tell her, don't like when you quarrel already, everybody sour mood, then you say, oh, but yesterday you also do this. That's the worst time to bring it up.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, so I think we come to the end of today's fireside chat. I think thanks Nat for the time with us today. I believe some of us have some insights as to what is required. But of course, if anyone wants to reach out to Nat, just feel free to reach out. I think Nat, you're happy to share your details with them as well, right?
Sure, please. No problem. I mean, if they reach out to you, please feel free.
Yeah, we will pass it over to him. And like I said, Nat is a specialist in the tech sector when it comes to the legal aspect of things. All right, so thanks everyone to be on the call today. And if anyone has any feedback or anything, please feel free to reach out, or any follow-up questions that you want to have a conversation with Nat, feel free to reach out. All right.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.